Yes, you have about like that. I mean,
Okay.
you're speaking here, it's okay.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Elle.
Speaking distance is pretty natural. It's just about here. Yeah, and here. Raising, lowering.
Well, we're not, except for Aaron, we're not very tall.
I know, well, he's going through, so we'll see. So you want it about this height, but you can raise it by doing this. So, and about that distance is fine, okay? But let me show you the remote microphone.
All right. Well, welcome, and thank you all so much for coming. Just quick reminder to turn off your phones or silence them, but if they go off, none of us are going to be upset by that. Quick reminder to turn off your phones or silence them, although if they go off during this, extremely solemn occasion, we will not be upset by it. All right? For those of us who knew Evan, and if you didn't, it's unlikely you would be here. A church may seem like an unlikely place to celebrate his life. But it's a beautiful setting. Evan was at least partially Unitarian by his first marriage, and they're cool with Trafe Foods. I'm Aaron Stark. I'm Evan's first child. And Dad loved a story. My most memorable story of Dad in a church was Christmas Mass in Wivenhoe, England, where he started making barnyard animal noises to accompany the minister as he retold the manger story. As he talked about the sheep, Evan made baaing noises, etc., etc. He found it hilarious. Not everyone felt the same way. Though usually when Dad pushed against conventions, it was not just for the sake of disruption, but because he had a point to make or a law to push for or against. As Evan used his own stories and those of others, you're going to reference a list of films that are going to be at the tables up there, to teach us about humanity and decision-making. He tried to show us how it's okay to walk off the trail, to sometimes ignore the no trespassing signs, and to never cross a picket line. Although I still have issues with the no trespassing signs. Now, coming back to the Christmas bit, Dad loved all the aspects of his Christmas. But it was during Passover that he truly shined. While the archaeological record has thrown some doubts on the accuracy of the Passover story, much of which I got from Charlton Heston's The Ten Commandments, notably not in Evan's list of 100 greatest films, which will be available at your table. Actually. The tale of a righteous struggle and eventual triumph against oppression resonated, and Pop's performances on piano and accordion led the great music that punctuated the service. In our Seders, I always had some dread for the moment when we got to the opening of the door and looking for Elijah. But Evan genuinely loved going outside and looking for wandering goyim to invite in, a tradition that was significantly less weighted with anticipation when Evan and Ann left New Haven for Woodbridge. But Evan loved those moments of opportunity. Dad took pride in those actions that offered chances to connect in meaningful ways with people in real life, never locking the doors and supporting friends, neighbors, strangers, and political allies in need. He cherished those connections, whether with friends over a meal, or with colleagues at a conference, or over Zoom, or over a shopping cart at the grocery store. So we're here today to share our memories of Evan, and his joys, and certainly some tears. We're going to limit our fact-checking, although I still have questions about a supposed Brandeis football scholarship, and celebrate Evan's life. From the Bronx to Brandeis to St. Louis and Wisconsin, Minnesota, Hillsdale, New Haven and New Jersey, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England, France, Turkey, El Salvador, the Balkans, all places where he and Ann demonstrated their amazing capacity for finding friendship and comradeship by speaking their truth and supporting the liberation and empowerment of others. And Dad lived for those moments. During one of his trips back to the UK, Evan wrote, "I can't tell you how nourished I feel to see old friends." And he felt that way about many of you. And in the words of Evan, taken from another email during his travels, "Love to you all. Hopefully it goes without saying how much I appreciate your support or even just tolerance. I don't like being so exhausted and can tell in Mom's look she's worried about me. But once I start talking, no matter how tired to start, the passion returns for this work we do. And if some of it gets through, and a few folks join the push to get the rock up the hill, it is a good day." Marion, a friend, Hester, is not alone in feeling that we're fighting some of the same fights we thought we'd won decades ago, not just in the US around abortion and such, but in the nitty-gritty of our movement. Maybe. Now, I think we know for sure. But I do love the process, and probably the attention too. His words, not mine. And Dad was so grateful for that support and the acceptance of his ideas. It seemed that over the last 10 years or so, he had finally gotten to a place where he felt comfortable, that he had done the work and it had been listened to. So today we'll take time to tell the stories about Evan and to remember and celebrate his life. And this is a note from a friend who couldn't be here, Sarah Kay. She's a professional at this sort of thing. "I'll be thinking of you this weekend. I trust that you will find the words and that the ones that get away from you will be said by others. What's important is that people will gather and remember together. I wish I could be there. My good thoughts are with you." Thank you. And now I want to welcome Joyce, Evan's sister.
That's kind of a tough act to follow, I think. I'm Evan's sister, and shortly after Evan died, I was having breakfast with a friend who was also dealing with the loss of a sibling, her last sibling. And she said to me, "When you lose your husband, you're a widow. When you lose your parents, you're an orphan. But we have no words for the loss of a sibling." It's not that a label would tell us how to grieve or how to feel, but the absence somehow fits with me not knowing what to make of Evan's absence. Not just how to talk about it to others, but how to explain it to myself. We shared our childhoods, our growing up. Evan knew me since I was brought home from the hospital, although he was apparently quite disappointed. He had been promised a playmate, a brother or sister that he could play with, and he suggested that my parents take me back and get a different one, because all this one did was lie there and occasionally make noise. He was the witness to my whole life, as I was to most of his. We were the keepers of each other's early memories, of our family's history and experience. There's a bookcase armchair in their living room, which was where my father sat with his Royal typewriter on his lap and wrote his first novel. And Evan and I were the only people who could look at that chair and really see that. That's not to say that we agreed on the truth or accuracy of those memories. Someone said there are as many truths in a family as there are family members. But there's no one else I could even play that game with. I'm not sure yet exactly what it means to lose that one witness to my life, but I know it feels quite profound. The Evan I knew as my big brother, my sometimes big brother, was in some ways very different from the more evolved Evan that he was for many of you. I think there are other people who will address this. I think Aaron has already touched on some of that. Evan always wanted and needed to be the center of attention. I feel like he needs to be here to MC. He always struggled when it was my birthday and would greet guests coming, asking where his present was. And it was quite hard for my mother to explain to him that his time would come. When we had company over, which seemed like an awful lot, my mother would ask me to play piano for the guests. And while I pleaded with her to get off the hook, Evan would burst through from the bedroom wearing his accordion and say, "I'll play for you." And he would set off, depending on the era, on a set of Russian dancers, St. James Infirmary, or a Bach toccata and fugue. I experienced this as a rescue, which actually made it easier for me to be me, doing my thing quietly in the background while he took center stage. I would never call him a show-off, though, because he worked so hard for that spotlight. Hours and hours practicing accordion. He had a lead in the school play. I fed him lines endlessly, and to this day I think I know half of our town by heart. He took up trombone, of course with an oversized bell, so he could play in the school band. We lived in a small apartment and he had to practice by facing the trombone into our coat closet. But he studied music theory in and out of school to become a student conductor. After the COVID shutdown and he traveled less, he couldn't travel at all, and health and mobility issues hampered his style, most of his work, even some keynote addresses, were online. I commented to him that it must be a relief to not to have to do that exhausting travel. "Yeah," he said, "but I really miss the adoration of the audience." One thing Evan did not do in high school and not really in college was read, especially not fiction. He did well academically, but the secret was that he studied and memorized the Cliff Notes without actually reading the books. He also didn't really write more than was absolutely necessary, which drove our professor of English literature, poetry, and creative writing father absolutely crazy, which was, of course, the reason for it all. I believe that it was after our father died that he was truly liberated. He wrote more freely and became a voracious consumer of fiction. He became my book buddy. We traded lists of book recommendations, which some of you began to receive as a New Year offering, I think with a lot of guilt produced. I don't know at what point we became friends as well as siblings. I was often his sounding board on cases, a debriefer on his more gruesome ones. When Annie said, no. Despite our normal sibling fights, I always knew I could turn to him in distress in times of great insecurities, which were many, breakups, personal or academic crises, and there was never any judgment. He was also the person with whom I could share deep belly laughs, maybe as Aaron illustrated, when no one else would quite see the humor. After he had his pacemaker, he asked me, did I have any idea of how long the batteries would last? And I said, well, a friend of mine had hers changed. It was about 10 years. And he said, 10 years? And we both became hysterical. I think what I didn't understand for a really long time was his relationship with his work. After his quintuple bypass, he was looking for new jobs with more responsibilities and more travel. I asked him, this seems to be no time to be starting on new big projects. This is exactly the time, he said. And then, of course, came the 2 books. After the revised Coercive Control and Children of Coercive Control were released, I asked Evan what he would be working on next. Now, he was doing some writing on a memoir. Apparently, his children got pages of the memoir as he went along, but I never received my copies to make the corrections. But he said to me about his work, he said, I really think I'm finished. I felt a chill when I heard this. This was a week before he died. But looking back, although he obviously kept working and died in the middle of a consultation, I think there's a beauty in his coming to feel, as his life neared its end, a sense of his important work completed.
Thank you, Joyce. That was really beautiful. She has an advantage over me in terms of number of memories that she can tell you about. I'm just really grateful for all you for coming and being here with us to celebrate my father's life. To be honest, I've really dreaded this moment for a few years now, being up here, wondering what I could say. But our job here is very clear. It's right up on the screen. We're here to celebrate life. And I thought that one way we could do that would just be to take a moment to feel some gratitude. It might be a hard time for some of us to do that. I know it's hard for me. But if you're feeling up to it, maybe you can just join me and think for a moment how lucky we are. What are the odds that you even get to meet a man like Evan Stark, let alone have him for a friend or a teacher, an advocate, or a comrade? I just feel so grateful for the 47 years that I got to share the earth with him. And a lot of you knew him for longer, and I'm jealous. And I don't think you had to know him for a long time to kind of know what I'm talking about here. He had such a deep capacity for love, such curiosity about the world, how it works, such a passion for conversation, such a commitment to freedom and justice. And he pushed us all to think differently about ourselves and what was possible. Being up here, I was constantly thinking about being up here. I was constantly reminded of a story that he would tell sometimes about the 60s. And I'm not going to be able to tell it. I'm not going to try to tell it the way he would, because I know I couldn't. But it was about a professor, probably Hans Gerth, his mentor, the sociologist, who was trying to give a talk. And there was a radical student in the audience that kept interrupting him, shouting out, "Why are you up there? Talking to us down here." So the professor was very quiet for a moment, and he nodded and said, "Very well, I will come down there, and you can come up here." And it's a really simple story. It took me a long time to understand what it was about, but it's about power. The student has a really good question. Why are these idiots in charge? And at the same time, he hadn't really imagined himself up on this stage, And I think a lot of my father's work in politics and scholarship and everyday life had that goal to empower other people to help us to imagine ourselves stepping up and taking the stage someday. I don't know if any of you ever had the good luck to get into an argument with Evan. The hard part about arguing with him was that he didn't want to win. He didn't want you to agree with him. I think that would be, he wouldn't see the point in that. And that confused some people. But what he wanted to learn from other people, and he wanted to take the opportunity to teach and learn things together. I remember one really huge fight we had when I was a teenager. I don't remember how it started. We fought a lot when I was young. I know it's hard to believe, looking at me now, but I was a rebellious child once. And I do remember how the fight ended. Somehow it turned into a conversation about Sigmund Freud and his idea of the Oedipal complex, which my father explained to me. But he turned words into action, you know. I mean, that's what's really incredible about him. He showed by his example that change was possible in ways and places you couldn't even imagine. If not right now, maybe 20 years from now, 30 years from now. I mean, just think about how long he spent working out this idea of coercive control, and then turning this one little idea about relationships into laws that save lives. And, you know, and if not in the United States, well, somewhere else in the world, you know, all over the world. That kind of political imagination is something I think is really rare and special. I was really lucky to get to spend a lot of time with him the past few years, because during the early days of the COVID epidemic, my girlfriend Mel and I stayed at the house in Woodbridge for about 6 months. We thought we were coming for a weekend. But I'm so grateful now for that time, just living daily life with him, you know, getting up and reading the New York Times over breakfast, debating the ideas that he developed in his 1977 article, The Epidemic is a Social Event. For those of you who don't know, this early work of materialist epidemiology, the basic idea is very simple, that epidemics and diseases are not just things that happen to us. They're not just natural forces, and they're not caused by social conditions. Simply, they're things that we do together to one another, and they're political struggles. And his idea in that article was really beautiful. You know, he thought about collective self-help and the way it could give rise to new ways of thinking about how we might live and work together. That's his basic idea as far as I understood it. It's a complex article, and he wrote that about the time that I was born. I think he was really, really far ahead of his time. I don't think his time has come yet. I think it will come. And I just want to repeat how grateful I am. You know, I've done a lot of crying, but I am just so thankful to have had this father, this teacher, this best friend. He really set a supreme example of how to live, and I'm grateful to all of you for helping him to do that.
Hey everybody, thanks for being here. I want to just take a quick moment to acknowledge all the friends and colleagues of my dad who couldn't be here today in person. He had a reach that really was global, and I know Al and Jeanette among them really wanted to be here and would have loved to be here, and I want to acknowledge the relationship that they shared and how important that was to my dad. And we appreciate them, and I appreciate all of you for being here. I think it's funny that, and I'm not going to do as good a job as everyone else. They're doing fantastic, and I'm not going to play piano as good as Bill. When somebody dies who's very rich, they never get on and say how much this person loved money, right? But I think for my dad, it might be appropriate to acknowledge that he really didn't care about money very much. He had a huge Rolodex of coupons, and he would let me eat candy for free whenever we went to the supermarket, which, probably wasn't great for me, but he really didn't love money. And, they say money is the root of all evil. And so what I was thinking as I was coming over here is maybe, growing up in this little apartment in the Bronx and an atmosphere without a lot of money, maybe that experience of poverty was something that drove his, his desire to help people and to, fight oppression in the world. And maybe there's a way that poverty was kind of like the root of some of the innate goodness that he had in his heart. I think some of us who knew him have witnessed different occasions, when he just saw something happening that was bad, and he just put himself right in the line of fire. And not a lot of people would do that. I want to talk really briefly, because he's brave, and he really did not care about his own safety in those situations. And I've saw it several times. I know other people have seen it, so that was just amazing. In terms of his music, you know, there's a quality of playing the piano called touch, which is when your fingers have reached the point to really be able to communicate and get expression out of the piano. I don't think Evan ever got there. His fingers were too short. He learned not to bang after a while. But he did touch the piano, and he did touch people's hearts when he would play the piano, you know. He told me when I was embarking on a musical career, and he said, you know, never forget about the melody. The melody is the whole point of the song, you know, and he loved a song with a story. But I think also when he played, the rhythm was something that always came through. He always had a really strong beat. When he played. So I'm going to just play a really quick song, and then I'm going to get here and close out with a little Jewish Seder tradition. If he had gone to Brandeis on a football scholarship but never made it to Wisconsin, Dayenu. If he led protest movements in Wisconsin but didn't escape to Canada, if he worked with the farmers in Canada but didn't make it to Minneapolis and start a charter school, if he didn't start a beautiful family with Sally and raise Aaron, if he didn't get Ann into hot water with the FBI, if he didn't get married and start another family with 3 kids, if he didn't have an academic career and become a dean of public health at Rutgers, if he didn't do pioneering work with DVTP and write the clinical definition with Ann of domestic violence, if he didn't go on to redefine that as coercive control and publish a book on coercive control, if he didn't keep working through illness and publish the sequel, Children of Coercive Control, if he didn't go on to travel country to country and help write laws to put coercive control into action. So yeah, I was so glad to hear from Joyce that, you know, he had reached a point in his work where he felt like he had accomplished something, but I also know that he never stopped. He never stopped pushing, and he loved life, he loved people, he loved helping people, and I'm so grateful that he kept going.
All right. So I'm Eli. I'm Ann and Evan's youngest. And thank you all for being here. So I went in a lot of directions in preparing these remarks today. I thought about my dad as like a classic dad. For example, that he taught me to shave at 3 years old. But still, you know. Or that he taught me to split wood, wielding a maul with an Obelix-like ease, even at a height of like 5'6" tops. But he was not classic in really many senses of the word, and I'm so grateful for that. He could run the gamut on pretty much anything. Whether he really knew a subject, he sure could act like he did. He supported me when it mattered, questioned me when it mattered, and also when it didn't. So when questioning as to whether I had a 5-year plan, his motivator was, Stalin had one, and you should too. While I was finishing my undergrad dissertation, after dropping out of college for 3 years, he wrote me this poem. Your pear tree blossoms white, as do you, so right. That was it. That was the entire email. I formatted some of my remarks as a letter, and I think, to what Joyce said, I think that really resonates with me. I think because to talk about him in the third person feels so final or confusing. So anyway, dear Pops, the other night I dreamt you hugged me, and then I missed your hugs, which felt surprisingly childish, but also made me think of how your eyes would light up when any of us came home. I've almost called you so many times in the last 6 months, like cutting flowers at my CSA pickup because you liked flowers more than many men. I got soaked in a summer storm at the cabin and trying to get dry, and I was wondering, does the chimney there have a flue? It does not appear to, just FYI. I surprised the great blue fishing behind my house. She was so graceful, and I followed her downriver for a bit. On my way to the ice cream shop, I was in the mood for a chat. I finished the last book you recommended to me, all throughout wondering, what did he want me to think about the lion women of Tehran? Reimbursement is tanking for government-subsidized meds at my clinic, and not yet threatening solvency, but how can I fix that? I hurt my back, and I remembered that we have the same stance. My tomatoes were good this year, but our beans were measly and our squash didn't grow. But we got one really good jack-o'-lantern. I'm listening to more Janice and Ella these last few months, and who would have guessed that The Boss or Beyonce would also remind me of you? I miss you. We miss you, each finding holes where you were, where you are, in our own separate lives as well as in our family. Okay, this next section is an excerpt from an email from Evan to me and my brothers on his birthday, 2011. The subject line, birthday boy. March 10th, 2011. He's reminiscing on some favorite life moments. The things that really stay with me even deeper in my heart than the glorious moments of working with the women I work with and finally publishing the book I wanted to write is you guys and the total pride I feel in how incredible, how individual and different each of you are, what Menschkeits, how much compassion, wisdom, creativity, principle, and just plain goodness each of you brings into this life. This morning's news is that the Wisconsin governor has been able to crash the unions without the Dems returning. And it is hard not to feel, despite Clinton, that we let you down, our generation did, by not building a more solid, progressive foundation. That I did, a student leader who backed off and let my ambitions slide into various side trips into writing, family, and such. Much of the world seems to be moving in the right direction. I can't not believe our demonstrations had some echo in Egypt. Mubarak had recently resigned when the military refused to act against the masses occupying Tahrir Square. That's my note. Okay. But our country clearly is not moving in the right direction, and I will hate to die, as I inevitably will, with the planet no closer to whatever it is we wanted for, though the progress of women, civil rights, and ending apartheid were no small things. And you guys know I'm almost never down. But believe me when I say that each and all of you and your partners and Ezra and the cousins and theirs really have made this an incredible trip. And as it turns out, the side trips were the trip, so much more than anything I could have done or gotten had I marched to the left-wing archangel who was steering me for so long. You guys, and maybe also the medication and the remodeling, has put me in a place where I really want to be, made me feel like I have a home and a family and so much more. So he blessed me with a wonderful family and a very imposing physique. He instilled in me an ease of joy, a love for music, a passion for equity, a too loud laugh, a penchant for grocery stores and letters to the editor. So, in his honor, go to a show, putter in the garden, watch a bad movie, or even a good one. Take a walk in the woods, help someone out, share your opinion even if no one asked. Speak up even if you are afraid. Wear a tiny bathrobe. Sing without shame. Go to a demo or do some dirty dancing. Play a duet or visit a new city. Eat some oatmeal, preferably with frozen blueberries, or an orange, preferably in bed. Continue to learn always and find joy in small places. L'chaim. And now, a visual interlude.
Just going to take a quick check to see Steve Levine. Steve's not in the crowd, so Jean, you want to come up? You going to introduce her?
Come on, Jean. Well, you saw one of the photos there was of Jack Sternbach. Jack was the best man at Evan and Sally's wedding. Sally, where are you? I'm not sure. What year was that? 1968. All right. So Jack Sternbach, 1968, and this is Jean Hay Sternbach. And we've been friends for a long time, and she's going to read a poem that was written by Evan's dad, Erwin Stark, and it's called Postscript. She's going to read a poem. We're practicing with the mic. You got the mic?
Right, got the mic.
Okay. It's called Postscript to a Testament. Thanks, Jean.
Did everybody get this? This was a poem written by Evan's father and your father. Yes. Postscript to a testament. Leave us no finished world, no sculpture done to the last fine point of mediated grace, no world in which all victory is won, and each hard image bears the same self-face. No world where all the granite has been cut to perfect form and destiny is known. A friend, and each man's chiseled heart is shut to ecstasy and pain, a world of stone. We want no world where vision has been lost and no live flower leaves another bud. A world without an ocean still uncrossed, without one standard stained with valiant blood. These things we never asked, but this we do pray. Leave us some instruments, leave us some clay.
So Al and Jeanette weren't able to join us, so we're going to go on. This is Lisa. Lisa was a longtime friend and colleague of Evan.
It's such a thrill to meet Sally and Joyce and all the spectacular Starks, little and big. Obviously, brains and musicality and a sense of humor run in the family. Evan Stark had an outsized influence on my life, as he had on many lives. He was my mentor, my friend, and a guiding light for the field of those of us who work on violence in families. I first encountered Evan and Ann at a conference in 1996, and then read their book, which was mind-blowing. I underlined the heck out of it and cited it, and pretty much forgot about it, busy as I was with 3 children and an academic career in child abuse and culture. In 2012, I extricated myself from a harmful relationship, reeling, humiliated, and unable to remember who I had been before. A friend in Argentina who works in domestic violence said, "That sounds like coercive control. You should read this book by Evan Stark." I had the experience that thousands, if not tens of thousands of women have had reading Evan's work. The concept of coercive control connected the dots to help me understand my own subjugation and my disorientation. It also helped me understand what I had been seeing in so many families. I loved Evan's work on coercive control. I still love it, and I wanted everyone to know about it. His writing was brilliant, but dense and academic. Sorry, it's true. I set out to translate it for a wider audience. I sought Evan's blessing to write a graphic novel about coercive control, and that's when I connected with Evan and Ann again. He didn't know me from anywhere, and he said, "Yeah, sure, come on over for lunch." And I had a great time with him and Ann in 2013. He gave me his blessing for this book and was generous with his feedback, as he is with all of us. He's so generous with his time. And that graphic novel eventually became Invisible Chains, which is, as far as I know, the second book ever written on coercive control, and the publisher had me not include the illustrations. Evan set me on a path to become an expert witness in coercive control cases, first in family court and now in criminal court as well. We exchanged case reports and feedback, and he criticized me and others in the field as being too psychological. I learned from Evan how to focus on the deprivation of liberty as a basic human right, and that's what it was all about. Evan unflinchingly denounced sexism in a way I have seen few people do ever. I remember him on a stage in England in 2019 at a conference on coercive control. He spoke vehemently about patriarchy. He shouted about women who were trapped with their abusers, their options limited by sexism. He paced and raised his fists and cursed to make his points. He knew that as a white male professor, he could get away with it. We in the audience were delighted and grateful. I don't think Evan would like being portrayed as some kind of saint just because he's no longer here in the flesh. I think he prided himself on being a little rough around the edges. Would you agree that he could be cantankerous and impatient? He did not mince his words, a characteristic I share and appreciate. I work on coercive control legal cases all the time these days, as several other people here do, and I miss my conversations with Evan. Our talks were like a shot of caffeine. He helped me focus on what mattered and feel energized to keep going. And he could also be so soothing and compassionate. As I got to know Evan and Anne over time, I saw that their social commitments ran deep, not just regarding coercive control and women's rights, but also a host of other social issues that needed righting. And it was beautiful to see how Evan cherished Sally and Anne and all his offspring. I wrote a review of Evan's book on children this past spring, and Evan provided me with this quote, which I'm going to read because I feel like his academic voice, his scholarly voice should be here a little bit too, but I will confess, I did make the sentences shorter and cut out some of the longer words. He said, "I conceive of coercive control as a global offense used to monopolize the resources and privileges in a personal, family, or social space. It can be committed by anyone in a range of settings, but because vast sexual inequalities persist in all societies, the most common and devastating coercive control is used by men to garner resources and privileges through exploiting women in personal life. Thus, coercive control is gendered by the opportunities that sexual inequalities create to exploit, isolate, and dominate women and children." I try to channel Evan as I work with people who are leaving coercive controllers and looking for justice from the courts. Like many of you, I try to keep a spark from Evan's flame alive within me. It is hard to imagine going forth in the field without Evan, but we do and we must, because there is still so much work to be done.
And now we're going to welcome Jill to the stage. Hey, Jill, also a friend and colleague of Evan's.
I think, like the other speakers, been sort of dreading this and trying to plan for it. And when I came in, I told Ann I made a lot of notes. And I said, but I still don't know what I'm going to say. And she goes, you're going to say something, right? I knew Evan for 23 years. To me, he was an expert witness, a colleague, a mentor, and a friend. And it's hard to choose which lens to speak of him, through which to speak of him today. I met him in 2001 when I was a young attorney at Sanctuary for Families. And in his recent book, Evan describes me as a then young attorney. Thank you. Very important. I was working with two attorneys, Carolyn Kubitschek and David Lansner, who, like Ann and Evan, were a powerhouse husband and wife team. They were on the legal side. They were civil rights attorneys working tirelessly and effectively to change the child welfare system in New York City. We were involved in a class action lawsuit called Nicholson. The lead plaintiff was Charlene Nicholson, a victim of domestic violence who had her children removed from her and placed in foster care after she was assaulted by a former partner in her home while her children were there. New York City CPS had bastardized Ann and Evan's research at Yale, among other things, which found domestic violence to be the most significant context for child abuse. So, with that research, CPS began to consider domestic violence in the child welfare context, but not in a good way. Evan wrote about our first meeting when I called him to ask him to be involved in the Nicholson case. And before I share that with you, we needed an expert witness in the Nicholson case. We got fast-tracked to a trial in the case by a lefty judge, Jack Weinstein, who was very much like Evan, brilliant, lefty, radical. And we had to find an expert witness, but we needed someone who would hit the ground running and really match Judge Weinstein's intellect. So we talked to many of the marquee experts in domestic violence at the time, but they were so timid. They were litigation averse. They wanted to work within systems. I don't want to get in the middle of this, one potential expert said. These things are tricky, said another one. Evan Stark's name came up. I was warned. I hadn't met him yet, but I was warned he could be brusque. Some of his ideas were radical. He was a loose cannon. He was hard to control as an expert. And I thought, oh, like me. So Evan described our first call in his book, his most recent book, Children of Coercive Control. And I read it to you. When I read it to you, you'll understand I'm not just illustrating the contents of our first meeting. The caller was Jill Zaccardi, then a young staff attorney with Sanctuary for Families and Children. Did I want to work on the Nicholson case, she asked. And here's the part. Her question was a little like Frederick Engels selling the Communist Manifesto at the Berlin Zoo in 1855 by asking a sucker in the crowd, do you know what stage of the class struggle you're at? No one at the Berlin Zoo had heard of class struggle. And then he goes on, huh? I mumbled sheepishly, what's the Nicholson case? And that was often the way a conversation with Evan went. It just, still not entirely clear what that section is all about. So Evan agreed to review materials for the case, and unlike other potential experts who wanted to make sure we wouldn't go too far before they would agree to work with us, I could tell from our conversation, Evan wanted to make sure we would go far enough. He was not going to waste his time. He was not interested if we were going to get involved in some settlement with a panel and blah, blah, blah. He was in it if we were in it, and we were. So I packed 4 boxes into my car the next day. He said we could FedEx him. I thought, yeah, you don't know what you're getting into. So I packed 4 file boxes into my car, and I drove from Brooklyn to Woodbridge to deliver them in person, figuring how could he say no to my face? And he couldn't. Within 2 months, he was on the witness stand testifying, and he didn't testify as much as he and Judge Weinstein had a conversation without having to tolerate us mere mortals interrupting with questions. The decision came down, and it was all Evan. It was a 102-page decision, and which changed the field of domestic violence and child welfare And I remember sitting in a coffee shop talking to Evan on my flip phone, and I think both of us were kind of in shock at how good the decision was, how correct and how succinctly it conveyed Evan's expert opinion and the battered mother's dilemma. When I met Evan, he told me, see, I told you I'm all over the place. When we met, Evan emphasized to me that he was a systems change person, not an individual change person. And I have news for you, Evan. You were both. You listened to victims and you gave a name to their experiences, how abusers and systems like the child welfare system subjugated primarily women. Shortly after Evan died, even before the obituaries were published, I had a woman in my office to prepare for a civil protection order trial. As we talked about her experience, which was a carefully curated mixture of physical, psychological, verbal, emotional, and financial abuse, I said, yes, that's called coercive control. Evan Stark, do you know of it? And she said she did, and she started crying. And she said, he just died. The news had spread very quickly amongst the grassroots, listservs, and online groups of victims. Evan changed their lives, and I know that many of them are watching this Zoom memorial. Evan talked a lot, a lot. But he also listened. And the year before he died, I was having a hard time with the custody case where I felt I wasn't breaking through, wasn't connecting the dots for the judge. It wasn't a case where it would have been useful to call Evan in as an expert. When the decision came in, the custody decision, I was devastated at the language used to describe the victim's testimony. Even as the court found her credible and concluded that domestic violence had occurred, the decision described the victim as histrionic. My first call after receiving the decision was Evan. I am not a crier, but I cried and cried and cried as I ricocheted between my feelings of outrage and impotence, which I know was something he experienced as well in doing this work. And I remember he just kept saying, "Oh, honey," and that's a voice that I will always hear in my head. When I met my husband, Sean, a person as far from DV world as one could be, Evan embraced him. One day we stopped by to see Evan and Ann on our way back to New York, where we were living at the time, and we mentioned we wanted to get married, but wanted something low-key. 12 weeks later, we got married in Ann and Evan's backyard. A beautiful day, blessedly free of domestic violence, child welfare, and full of love. One of our favorite Evan stories, my husband and I, is from the morning of our wedding. Evan was in very good spirits, bopping around the house in his ripped t-shirt and baseball cap as we got ready. And he decided at that moment to go through his record collection. I came out from getting dressed about a half hour before people were set to arrive, and there was records all over the floor of the living room. And Sean and I laugh about that to this day. And then he decided to play the piano with my father-in-law, who also played the piano. And guests started arriving, and Ann finally had to remind him that maybe he should go change and get ready for the wedding. But I cherish that memory because all of the stuff that Evan and I worked on together, all of the trauma and all of the disappointments and all the successes, that's just a lovely memory of Evan being Evan and showing love. It's been really, really hard for me to think about how to close this out. I'm very grateful for all the other speakers. You encapsulated Evan so perfectly, so that takes some of the pressure off. I think what I'd like to do is close emphasizing how much Evan affected individuals, even if he thought he was just a systems change guy. Charlene Nicholson is here, who was the named plaintiff in the class action lawsuit, and I'm going to put the burden on her of closing it out if she doesn't mind coming up.
Good afternoon, everyone. She just brought me down memory lane, and Dr. Evan Starks and this one here, they're two powerhouse, let me tell you. And no wonder we had the win that we got that year, because they don't give up. They never give up. And I am so grateful to be here today. I have just a couple words that I wrote, just to keep me on track. Today we remember and honor the incredible legacy of Dr. Evan Stark, who truly made a difference by listening to survivors of domestic violence. His work and dedication to understanding the experiences of those affected by abuse have left such a mark on the field and on the lives of countless women. Thank you, Dr. Stark, for your compassion, your courage, and your willingness to truly hear the voices of survivors. Your dedication and commitment to creating a safer world for all will never be forgotten. To his families and friends, colleagues, I would like to remind you that you should leave here today knowing that Dr. Stark's work has made a lasting difference in women's lives like myself. Thank you so much.
I do. Great. I do. I do. Yeah, you're all supposed to be up here. Come on. Come on. You're all supposed to be up here. Ash, you too. Madeline.
Literally everything.
Oh.
That's all right.
I think it's good with just.
Okay.
Okay, good.
An amazing team, huh? It's been a wonderful tribute to Evan. And thank you, Aji. And I think it's remarkable to me as I reflect upon these four wonderful people, how they each embrace an important part of Evan. We have Aaron, the teacher, Sam, the scholar, Daniel, the musician, and Eli, the healer. It doesn't get any better than that. And we're honored that you're here today. Evan, of course, would put us to work, and he would want us to use this event to reflect upon our own histories of engagement in social change, and to take pride in our work, and not to be discouraged in this temporary moment, but instead to acknowledge our deep roots in the experiences that we've shared and the many movements that we've built and sustained. He would want us to celebrate the strength that comes to listening to one another and listening to those whose lives we seek to improve. And he would want us also to insist upon a radical freedom in everyday life for all peoples. So thank you for being there. Thank you for all that you do, for your advocacy, your creativity, your strength, your tremendous intellectual and creative talent, and for taking time in all of these endeavors to savor the joys of friendship for all who travel this road with us. Evan's life was enriched immeasurably by your friendship and love. and our lives are similarly enriched. Thank you so very much.
And then just to close out, because again, we feel like, Evan's life really was one of storytelling in so many ways. We wanted to give people the chance to talk. And so we got a little bit of time left, but if, we've got a few people who would like things to have some things to say, some memories of Evan. And just want to start with Steve over here. Steve was one of Evan's oldest friends. Right here. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve.
Oh, okay, well, hello, everybody.
You take it to
Sorry, I had a little trouble getting here, so I was late, so as you can see, I'm out of order as usual in talking. And I think I do hold the distinction, unless there are people here that were with Evan in public school or high school, and maybe college, who may have known him longer than I have, but I think I've known Evan longer than probably anybody here. Oh, except for Joyce, I didn't think of that. Well, see, okay, you don't always think of everything, and I'm very good at that. So, I loved Evan dearly, and like some of the people here, I never actually worked with him on the thing he was brilliant at. I had other things in my career, but we remain friends now. So it's going on, let's see, 63 years that we were friends. And I do remember incredible things about him. I'll give you one instance. We were at Wisconsin. We were acquainted at Brandeis, but not the closest of friends. But we found ourselves together at Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin. And we roomed together for a year. We were roommates. And I learned a lot from him. And of course, we were anti-war immediately after the Gulf of Tonkin. And very soon after that, the students got together with a lot of faculty, a really large number, and decided they were going to do a sit-in at the local Air Force base. And I thought that was great, and have a lot of people there, and we really make a thing. And so just a few days later, they all met again, and they had been dissuaded by members of the faculty and other things, and they practically all decided that they wouldn't do it. Well, that didn't sit so well with me and a lot of others, people who were in the civil rights movement, Quakers, people like that. So I stepped forward, and then they stepped forward, and we formed a subgroup right there and then, in that auditorium, to continue and do the sit-in. And we got organized. And Evan, he wasn't so sure. He kind of tried to dissuade me from doing it. But we went ahead, all kinds of things happened. Well, I'll cut to the chase. And so there we are in front of the Air Force Base, sitting down, blocking it, And there's only, I don't remember, it couldn't have been more than 15 people. And suddenly, waiting for the police to come, suddenly behind me I hear this noise. And there's Evan leading a huge number of people, 100 people. He's come to support us, not necessarily to sit in, but he came to support us. And that just, for the rest of my life, I'll never forget that. That was Evan. That was the kind of guy Evan was. And so there's a lot of things happen. But the amazing thing about Evan is that he knew everybody. I see all these people who knew him and friends. Well, yeah, I think you're just a fraction. Like I visited him in New Haven, and it's a big city, 200,000, I don't know. And we'd be downtown, and it never failed, he'd bump into somebody that he knew, always. And I'd have to stay and have a long conversation with them, and I'd stand there, and it happened every time, maybe even two people, every time we go downtown. And he knew, I believe we were in another city once, and he bumped into somebody there, maybe once or twice. And it always reminds me of the joke, there's a big mob in the Vatican, and some people come out on the balcony, a bunch of people. And one guy pokes the other and says, "Hey, who was that up there with Evan Stark?" That's the kind of guy he was. And I loved him so much, and it's so sad that he went. And but his legacy will live on. When he died, I was talking phone shrink, and I told him, my best friend Evan had died, and I wanted to describe to him, what kind of guy he was. I thought the best thing was to go online and look up his biopic. So the first thing you see is all the books he wrote. I don't know, 10, 15, God knows. And, so I was able to read that out. The next thing were his honors. And I could not scroll down to the bottom of the page to tell him there were infinite number. I was scrolling and scrolling. I couldn't tell him everyone, one after another, this society, that. And then finally, at the end, his papers. Same thing, hundreds of scrolling down, and he was amazed. And that was Evan Stark. To me, the most friendly and beautiful person. There's nobody like him. He may have gotten down on some other people, but I know with me, he hardly ever was critical or, no matter what I did. And I did some nasty things. Let me tell you, I think it was at Wisconsin, for instance. And, he didn't bat an eye because he was that kind of guy, to his friends. And I have a lot of friends that give me a lot of, you give me a lot of solace, But he never would do that. And that's Evan Stark, and I will always remember, and the world will remember him. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Peter Rothenberg. I wanted to take this opportunity to thank Evan for something he did for me 30-something years ago in front of his friends and family, this beautiful opportunity. Evan and I go back to the 70s. So the backstory is I'm an 83-year-old psychotherapist who's going into his 53rd year of private practice, and over the years, I can't tell you how many times I have a guy walk into my office and he says, "Doc, I'm going crazy, you gotta help me." I come home from work and I bring her flowers and I ask her how her day is, and she tells me she had a problem at work. I offer her 2 or 3 solutions and she wants to take my head off. And he's a typically gendered guy, and he learned that as a young boy that being a good man means you fix things, you take care of business, you solve problems. And so he loves her and he's trying to help her, and she's really pissed off at him. And so, the work is, I explained to him that she's not broken, she doesn't want to be fixed, and I teach him relational skills. And in that work, it's very likely that I'm going to tell him a story about my old friend Evan and something he did for me a long time ago. I had the good sense to ask my friend Evan, who was not a trained therapist, to help me run men's groups in my office in Madison many years ago. And we used to schmooze before and after groups about our lives together. And one day, I was really hurting about something. Somebody had really hurt my feelings. I have no idea what the issue was, but I told Evan about how upset I was, and he just listened to me. And when I was finished, he just looked me in the eye and he said, "Oh, Peter, I'm so sorry." And I had never had a man hear me and see me and respond that way to me in my life. It touched me so deeply.
I'm Dave Burbank. I know Evan as a dad. I was part of a group of kids who were in a cooperative State Street daycare where moms and dads would each take a turn parenting this mob of wild children. And this was back in the day of like free-range parenting, where the parents would just sort of let you go do your own crazy thing and have like dirt fights and things like that, while they stood around and vaguely supervised and made sure we didn't actually kill each other, and occasionally participated in attempting to kill each other. So I knew Evan early on, and from him got to know Josh Bloom and Aaron Stark and all these people I consider my actual brothers. And the thing I remember growing up with that crew is feeling like I had a village. When kids were going through their changes in identity and trying to figure out who they were, I remember thinking what's my ethnicity? What is it that I have that I can hold on to? And what I had to hold on to was that village, was that sense of speak up when shit is wrong, and raise your voice, and protest, and stand in a crowd of people with giant puppets overhead, and sit on couches that are in the shape of big naked ladies that, was at Meg's house. And, not just question authority, but say, F you, why am I listening to you? You better have a damn good answer. And Evan was a big part of that. Evan had the immense capacity to bullshit about anything, to the extent that it always seemed like he knew what he was doing no matter what, with sort of a wry sense of glee about it. He delighted in the difficult bits. So for instance, there'd be a crew of kids in our after-school or daycare program who wanted to hear a story, and he'd pull out Grimm's fairy tales and find the bloodiest, goriest fairy tale that he could read to us, and really lean in on the verbs and embellish the story to the point where you're like, oh, that was horrible, read it again. And I remember at one point we were arguing back and forth about which story he should read or reread, and we couldn't agree. So he said, all right, I'll tell you what, I'm going to tell you a story. And he told us this story called The Moonstone. The Moonstone. And at that point, forget Grimm's fairy tales, right? Any day we wanted to hear a story, we were like, let's go ahead and hear The Moonstone. And it was a story he was making up off the top of his head and just expounding for day after day, and it would leave you at a cliffhanger inevitably. And be like, what happens next? So we'd race to after school to okay, hurry up, what's happening with the Moonstone? And at some point he wouldn't want to tell it, or there'd be a sense of suspense, or he wasn't, on shift that day or whatever, and we get so frustrated. But later on, I was looking through bookshelves at work at a library now. I'm a librarian and myself a storyteller. And I was I came across the title, The Moonstone. I was like, that MFer. He wasn't making that stuff up. But he actually was, because I pulled it off, and there were some elements in there, but he was just remembering a story he read and adding to it, and so on and so forth. One more story that was similar that reminded me of him is I was talking with friends about sort of the free-range childhood I had, and how I'll get halfway through some of the stories I tell about my childhood and be like, where were my parents? I'll be halfway up a cliff on the face of West Rock, and looking down going, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this situation or whatever, and realizing okay, I did it, I got out of it, I survived. Back from the generation, the last generation that didn't have seat belts or cell phones to raise them or whatever. And I remember we were just sort of kind of rough and tumble in a way that was enjoyable. And a lot of it came from the experience of moms and dads, and in my case being a dad, especially dads, giving you a little bit of muscular play to go out into the world and attack it. I remember Peter Rothenberg throwing me across a pool once, which I remember fondly. And in the case of Evan, I remember there was at one point, he was done with telling the story, and we, were pent up with energy, and there must have been a mob of 6 of us, all boys, attacking him, throwing him in headlocks and climbing up his body, and he's gleefully flinging us onto couches and across. And I think I had him in a headlock and was he was turning red-faced. I'd knocked his tweed cap off, and he reached back and grabbed me by the testicles. And, coercive control of a very different sort there. And you can't really raise your kids that way nowadays, but I was telling this story in the presence of Paul Garver, who's an international labor organizer. He's like, I remember Evan Stark from leftist politics. He's like, and he argued that exact same way. So, thank you to Evan.
I'm Madeline, and I'm the partner of Eli. So Evan often wrote poems. You've heard a couple of them. He often did it for people's birthdays. Anyway, I loved them. And one of the birthday poems that he sent about a decade ago was titled A Little Ditty for the Kitty, and I don't know why, but it made no sense, but I think it's funny. And so, Evan, this one's for you. a little ditty for the kitty, too, in the style of Evan Stark. To celebrate your life, we're gathered this day. You were quite remarkable, what can I say? You welcomed me fully from almost day one, 15 plus years ago, when I started dating your youngest son. In conversations with you, I was the only one in the room that wasn't taken for granted and won't be forgotten soon. Your relationship with said son Eli always warmed my heart. You loved him so fully, that can't be taken apart. Your passions and opinions, admirable and true, I respected your vision. You were always so wholly you. And then there came Ash. Your embrace was so pure, sharing books, thoughts, and music, so caring and sure. You're a relationship maker. That's what brings us all here. It's a gift that you've left for us, even when you're not near. Full of warmth, song, and dance, kindness, humor, and play, you've entered my heart in a permanent way.
A minute. Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is Chitra, and I've only known Evan from 2008 or so, between 2008 and 2010. You can fact check. I met him at a conference. We were on a panel, and I didn't really pay attention to who he was. I gave my talk. I stepped down, and a much younger than Evan, such a much younger than Chitra, you were very articulate, and I was pissed. And in my head, I started to think, would you say this to a white man? Would you even say this to a white woman? And I looked at him, I was about to spit, and he was looking down like a little boy. And my heart just melted. I realized he realized what he had done without thinking, and my heart just melted. And so I was about to snap at him, and I thought, wait, let this one go. And then he said, still in the voice of a little boy, have you, by any chance, have you read my book called Coercive Control by Evan Stark? I am Evan Stark. And my blood ran a little cold, and I wish I had insulted him. I didn't. I said, actually, I have, and I really quite enjoyed it. And that's how we met. The rest of our 16, 17 years, I was really jealous hearing how people found him gentle and compassionate. Fuck, man, we fought. We fought over email, we fought on the phone, we fought in prison, we fought on dissertation committees, we fought in the hallways, we fought. And at some point, fairly early, I think I said to him something not so articulately. You like being adored, Evan? I am no bloody Christian. I do not adore. I'm not going to adore you. I dislike adoration. You're not getting attention from me. And he looked at me and said, and you don't like to be adored? I said, no. I like to be socially and intellectually engaged. And so he more or less then said, well, let's have it. And that was it. It was wonderful. I called him crying when I was upset. He challenged me. I called him bewildered as being bullied at work. He challenged me. He called me a coward. I said I sometimes felt lost, being the loudest and angriest voice in my department. He's like, so what? Do you want them to like you? I was afraid sometimes in court. He said, what, they're going to arrest you? So I don't, I saw Evan at his most intellectual, at his most arrogant, and his most humble. Throughout all these fights, if I won the arguments, I'm going to say it was 60-40. I let him win a little bit. Just out of respect for an elder. He always would agree when my argument was more solid than his, and I learned that there was a place in this world, not for many of us, but for some of us, who can be so intellectually free and authentic and respected. When I heard he had passed, I had this sense of like, oh my God, who am I going to fight with? And not fear that I won't be loved or respected at the end of the hour. I invite all of you at the partaking later to come fight with me. Come fight with me in the way Evan would love. Come argue with me. I'll start the argument now. As I entered, the pianist was playing a Gershwin piece that made me cry for 5 minutes. Evan liked Gershwin. In between fighting, we talked about music, and he scorned my classical tastes, which run 19th century romantic. And I scorned his taste, which run through the 3 Bs. Bach, Beethoven, Bruckner, he claimed, and doesn't look convinced. And so what was playing was Gershwin's Our Love Is Here to Stay, and it was being played correctly. The Gershwin brother wrote it, and I remember who died was Ira, George, I sort of don't want to know. But one of the Gershwins died prematurely from a brain forget the word, embolism. He had already written, I think, the lyrics, no, the music. So it was Ira put lyrics to it, and it's actually a song that says to his brother, I will never forget you. The Rockies may crumble, Gibraltar may tumble. They're only made of clay, but our love is here to stay. That wasn't a challenge, was it? Well, one of you channeling Evan will think of one. That song should never be played as a love song. It should be only played as a memorial. That's the challenge. People should stop singing it as a love song. That's not why Gershwin wrote it. He wrote it to honor his brother, whom he loved deeply. And it was the right song to play. And at this, thank you.
I'm guessing in this room I know Evan probably the shortest amount of time. In 2019, I decided to go on for a doctorate and to focus on psychological abuse because I realized I had been in a relationship for a very long period of time and had suffered it and had finally been leaving the person or escaping. And then I came to know Evan's work in all of my research and became immensely immersed in coercive control, and met Dr. Lisa Fontes. But most importantly, I'm here today and I decided to speak because I want to just express on behalf of all the protective mothers in the world who are suffering coercive control and whose children are suffering coercive control. There are so many out there, and he has given language to their experiences. There is no way that I could ever express the gratitude, the ability to be heard, to be actually identified as someone who is suffering in a world where we always look through the violent incident model. So I am beyond grateful and honored to be here. In my wildest dreams, I would hope someday that Evan and I could be friends. He was a mentor. He was harsh. He was critical of my writing and of some of my work. But it's because of him, and it's because of his work and the work that I've been doing since the beginning of time, that there are protective parents out there, protective mothers, who actually are seen. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Noah Bloom, and I'm part of the unruly pack of children that Evan helped raise that Dave was talking about. And I just wanted to tell one super quick story, but in typical Evan Stark fashion, this small moment had big impact on me. So I had left New Haven for about 20 years and came back to be the director of programs at Neighborhood Music School, where Evan and Ann studied piano lessons. And I think on my third day of being there, I walked into the lobby and I saw Evan, and he, said, "You're not wearing diapers anymore." And we started to begin to talk, and I looked very distracted. And he said, "What's on your mind?" And I said, "I'm about to go into an executive committee meeting, and I'm supposed to tell them my vision for the school on my third day." And I'm a little nervous because not only do I want to speak about the amazing things they do, but I want to speak about all the changes I want to make. And he was like, you have to speak truth to power. You have to speak truth to power. So I went back actually through a long hallway where no students were, no parents were, just me and the executive committee. And I sat down to begin to tell them the story and balancing how to celebrate all the wonderful things we were doing also with the changes I wanted to make. And in a very tense moment, the door flew open, unannounced, and there was Evan. Came right into the meeting, and he looked at this executive committee and he said, "Do not believe one damn word he says." And they paused, and much like all of you, were in shock. And he said, "Do not believe one damn word he says, believe all the words he says." And actually that moment, it was everything Evan stood for: being righteous, being humorous, and knowing exactly the timing to move energy forward. And today, they believe at least one word I say, and I thank Evan for that.
Sadly, because I know we have many more Evan stories, we have to end our time in this room. But please join us all for some food, some more talking, and a chance to share some more stories, you know, on a personal level. And thank you again so much for coming. I really appreciate it, each and every one of you. Yes? Yeah, come on, G. We gotta cut it, we gotta go.
I didn't think I would speak, but inspired by everyone, I just wrote something really quick. Annie and Evan were some of my parents' best friends, so I had the enormous pleasure of visiting their home and staying with them regularly during my childhood. My strongest memories are of the warmth in that house. The laughter, the delight in a good argument, the sparkle in Evan's eyes, the food and playfulness, the freedom to explore ideas and actions. This is how he connected his work and home life. This was his inspiration, to allow the people he worked with and supported to know that this kind of warmth and freedom is the goal in the world and the place where we spend so much time, our homes. When you are stuck in a violent and restrictive place, it can be so hard to imagine another way that things can be. Evan knew that home and family life could be a haven and a place to feel and nurture love and support, because that was how he lived. The way my parents would both light up and fully relax during our visits, and I would too. Evan created a haven in his home, and his openness, curiosity, and warmth clearly created a haven for so many people who spoke to him and interacted with him in all areas of his life. I'm so grateful that I knew him, and I'm so grateful to know his family. Thank you.
I don't really have anything else to say, but let's make our way and have some food.